Chapter 1. I was drawing before I was 6, mostly comic books starring a war correspondent called Betsy. As I grew older, my characters got more sophisticated, like Fantastic Jenny, Girl of the Future, and Janice Makepeace, Determined Private Eye. I even tried painting with colored crayon. But my dad was a working man. He made stockings on a big black machine called a power frame in a surgical supplies factory. He said he couldn't afford to have any of his children dilly-dallying around with art. This will not be a typical northern story. There are no cricket bats in the hallway, or Yorkshire pudding in the oven, and I never met J.B. Priestley, or Freddie Truman. But I did meet Brian Truman, a Southerner. He worked up here in York, for a firm of stockbrokers. He was a good-looking young man, but there was about Brian the look of a man who needed finishing. He was a very boring, but kindly man, so not being spoiled for choice, my parents encouraged me to marry him. I'd met him in a pub that was later to burn down. We had our first snack together in a cafe that was gutted by a rampaging 10-ton lorry 2 weeks later. We spent our first day at a folk club that caught fire the morning after. Now to some of you, this might have meant that the romance was hot. To me, it meant that the relationship was doomed from the start. Like Holden Caulfield, in that book by Salinger, I'd wanted a red baseball cap since I was 12 years old. I was 21, before I managed to acquire one. It came from a pen friend in America. I also wanted to be like Marlon Burley, surly, and snarling, in a torn t-shirt. Heavens girl, my dad said. You can't be like that Marlon Brando chap. You're a girl. I'd known that since I was 7, when I found out how strapless gowns were held up. And don't wear that red cap in the house. They don't play baseball in Yorkshire. It's not Christian. You look like a member of the Young Communist League in it. This was my father, who always stated the obvious. This was back in 1968, and I was 21. All right, I'd like to be like Pablo, I said. Who? Dad said. Picasso, you know, the painter. I've told you before, working class girls can't be artists, but I've been drawing since I was in nappies, you must have noticed. Put away childish things, spare me, I said. Okay, I'll be a poet then, like Emily Dickinson. She was American. Dad thought that was some ambition, wanting to be a Yank, and a Yank poet at that. He reminded me that my brother was studying something useful, and why couldn't I? Engineering. That's considered useful, practical, essential, is it? I got an arts degree, I said. Well, that's something, I suppose. You can get an office job. Companies choose arts graduates for their training programs. The university set up interviews for me. One company, insurance, told me I wasn't aggressive enough. I went along to a bank, same thing. I sloped off to the meat packing factory. The instant I stepped in the door, the stench hit me. Inside the main building, the smell was overpowering, yet no one there was wearing an oxygen mask or even wrinkling their nose. A bovine receptionist chewing a spearmint cud directed me to the personnel department. Mr. Green, the assistant personnel manager, took me on a tour of the packing department. The docile herd of male and female workers seemed to be patiently waiting the slaughter, while, in glazed pens along the wall, prize bulls watched. Mr. Green pointed his pink hoof at a space near the back. That's where you'll be, he oinked, if we decide to take you on. After leaving me in an empty room, to do several tests where I could hold a handkerchief to my nose, Green returned to say, I see nothing in your background that prepares you for a career in meat packing. That could mean that you'd bring a measure of candor to the job. He shook my hand. You'll be hearing from us. As he escorted me to the door, he said, one thing in your favor, you don't wear too much makeup. I left with mixed feelings. I couldn't stand the slaughter smell, but at least I hadn't been rejected. I imagined myself a scion of steaks, a champion of the boiled ham. My dad would be pleased. He would be able to look forward to truckloads of half-price bacon. A week later Mr. Green rang to tell me that someone had beaten me for the job. "You're obviously a nice girl," he said. "Perhaps a little sensitive for our needs." "What did he say, babe?" my father asked me. "They said I wasn't aggressive enough," I replied. Anyway, I told him, the stench inside was so bad, it was all I could do to stay on my feet. Perhaps I should go back to university, take a teacher's training course. "No bloody fear," my father said. "No more university. Out into the world, daughter mine. Babe, you have to earn your living." "Dad, there are whole armies of bright, neat, clean, hygienic women with shoe-button eyes, and shoe-button minds and shoe-button souls, willing to dedicate their lives to the creation of wealth. There's no problem finding people to fill their ranks." "But what about you, babe?" said Dad. "Yes, what about me? The oddball, who wanted to create something. I ought to have someone to cheer me on." Dad reminded me that he and Mum had never stopped me drawing. My dad wasn't a tyrant, but he was a Yorkshireman and very practical. "Oh, before I go any further. My name? Babe. Well, Babe Ruth was a baseball player, back in 1900 and way back. 5. Then, one year my pen friend in Seattle sent me a collection of cigarette cards, and there he was, funny looking bloke, but I liked the name. I been Babe ever since. I think Mum and Dad intended to call me Beverly, but they thought they couldn't afford a name like that. Then Dad said, "I know a man in the legal business. He needs someone for the post room. A young girl who can start from the ground up." "From the ground up?" I asked. "What on earth does that mean?" Dad said it meant I'd learn the job. Wait a minute, I said. "You are going too fast for me. You're suggesting a whole new lifestyle and—" "Lifestyle?" Dad interrupted. "What do you know about lifestyle? There's only one way to live, and that's by the sweat of your brow. You take up the law, my girl." "The law? What did I know about the law? The only law I knew about was what had been drummed into me at Sunday school. Moses' law, the 10 Commandments. I've often thought that before Moses came down the mountain with those stone tablets, he ought to have got them countersigned by God. Perhaps we'd have all taken a bit more notice." I asked Dad how much did this law firm pay. He told me a $5 a week, and vouchers. "What on earth are vouchers?" I asked him. He told me they were for lunch. "Okay," I said. "Not much of a wage, is it? I thought I'd be spared that beggars can't be choosers." I wasn't. Dad, of course, had to remind me. Since I was penniless at the age of 21, it was hard for me to argue against taking a job. So I started in the legal business, and painting became a hobby I reserved for my spare time. The York office of Hancock and Millers was a medium-sized branch. Head office was in London. Our branch was big enough to have 2 partners, Mr. Hayes and a younger man, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Hayes was a tall, distinguished-looking man with perfectly groomed white hair. We seldom saw him. When he did walk through the office in his double-breasted, pinstriped suit, he wore a broad grin as if to say that he knew legal secrets that he would never reveal to the staff. Mr. Dixon was younger and tenser, with long arms that banged against desktops as he paced around the office. Mr. Hayes was the one who had hired me, and I always felt that Mr. Dixon did not approve of his choice. They moved me from delivering legal papers to bookkeeping. But I wasn't developing fast enough for Mr. Dixon. One day, he suggested that I join the business club. He told me that this business club would help turn me into a potential and efficient member of the legal profession. I went reluctantly to my first club meeting, expecting to meet a herd of hardy fellas with crunching handshakes, and girls with pink twin sets and wearing strings of pearls. The first woman I met was Sheila Finlay, later to become my best friend. We were both in the ladies' cloakroom, half out of our raincoats before we realized that the place wasn't big enough for 2 grown women to disrobe in. We both giggled and both of us ended up outside the room, back in our coats. "Let's try again," she said. With the extra space, we successfully got out of our raincoats and then we introduced ourselves. "Babe," I said. "Sheila Finlay last time I looked," she said. She wore black framed glasses on a thin face that seemed prematurely lined, especially in the hollows of her cheeks. "This your first meeting?" "Yes," I said. "I hope you can stand the monumental topics we discuss here. At the present we are hoping to build a house for refugees where in the park you're bringing refugees, here, to York." "No. They're going to raffle off the house and send the money to Oxfam for medical supplies. Probably get snaffled by some politician in a shiny blue suit." We had dinner together, while the guest speaker, a local radio news reader, told us all what great work we were doing. I doodled on the table napkin. Sheila watched me do a caricature of the speaker. She laughed when she saw the news reader's nose take shape. "You like drawing?" she asked over the coffee later. "Oh, I fool around with paint and such." "Yes, I like it," I said, "but you don't work at it full time." "I'd like to," I replied. "It's more practical to have a job, so I'm learning the legal business. You should meet the people at the Arts Club. We get together every Friday, would-be writers, artists, and coffee table philosophers. Why don't you come along some Friday?" "I'd like that," I said, "but could it wait till after Christmas? I'm heavily booked at the moment." "Of course. Are you married?" she asked me. "No. Just sort of engaged to be engaged," I said. "Oh, that explains it," she said. But the road was becoming clear for marriage with Brian Trewin, home, children, and living together happily ever after. We even went to church together, every Sunday. Yes, it was getting dangerously comfortable. Chapter 2. The next morning, I woke up in my cluttered bedroom and heard my mother's Hoover. My mother had no respect for the weary on Saturday mornings, and Dad and I had either to get up or go insane listening to the Hoover whine. I usually lay awake cursing the noise, but this morning I thought about the idea of being an artist and living in a garret. The Hoover drove me out of the house. I went to see Brian. He told me that yesterday he'd bought a convertible unit bond in ICI and 300 shares of SA Gold. One for security, the other for risk. He said that I thought they'd both take off. I told you he was boring. But I pretended to be interested. It seemed the least I could do. "Isn't that great?" I said, "being right there in the center of the big financial world?" "You'll probably get to be a millionaire, I dare say I will," replied Brian. "When we get married, we'll have a summer cottage in the Lake District, with roses around the door, and a townhouse in York with a garage and a cleaning lady." Brian had yuppie ambitions, 25 years ahead of anyone else. "Lovely, Brian," I said. He went on, "and I'll join the golf club. It's got a very nice bar and restaurant, and I'll wear a cravat." "My, won't he be debonair?" "That was a good move when you joined those stockbrokers, Clark," I said. Now, Clark was my pet name for him. Superman comics were very big in the 60s, way before the films of the 70s and 80s. The idea was that he was Superman in disguise. Vomit making, isn't it? That night I let him slide his hand under my favorite canary cardigan. I kidded myself I loved him like mad. Trouble is, a woman starts off with her arms around a man and finishes up with her arms in a sink. Anyway, there he was batting out stocks and shares for his company, and there was I, wanting something totally different. Brian hated anything bohemian, people who lived the way I planned to do. He respected people who mapped out their careers, those who knew whose job they wanted in 5 years. Maybe I should send him a letter. "So long, Clark Kent, it's been fun," but the road was becoming clearer and clearer. Marriage with Brian was becoming too close, and when he suggested we went to see our local priest, panic arose in my craw. I saw the future mapped out. Years of the Financial Times stuck between the toast rack and the marmalade at breakfast. If I escaped, it would reduce onlookers to frenzied contempt, buttered with jealousy. I asked my new friend Sheila what she thought. She's training to be a first-class #1 bitch. Sheila had met Brian at the business club and thought him a nice young man, and that I was a lucky girl. Did you let him feel you up? She asked me. I've heard say he's really hot. Well, Sheila, I said, religion puts fear in you. If you get tempted, the Catholic Church is the best contraception. What do you mean? Said Sheila. Sex passes the time, lovely. She thought he was the kind of young man everyone likes. That's why I was beginning to hate the sight of him. I know Sheila thought it wasn't Brian I hated, but my circumstances, too acceptable. Here I was, a nice university graduate, in a nice job, and someday I'd have a nice wedding, and move to a nice neighborhood. But I lusted after something else. Poverty perhaps, or sloth, or rebellion. I wanted to retreat into a little place somewhere and paint all day, and lay around, drinking and smoking, and sleep with a man I didn't even like. Sheila asked me if Brian knew about these longings. He didn't, but my secret kept floating closer to the surface. I saw myself in a paint-stained shirt, open at the neck, sitting with brush, paints, and easel. Artists have models. I'd have a fellow modeling for me. He'd stand there, relaxed, but as still as a marble statue, in a torn t-shirt, his lips quivering in anticipation of our next embrace. Plaster will hang off the walls, and a mouse will make its home in the pantry. When I told Sheila this, she said, why don't you go to Paris and live in an attic? You like to paint and there's really nothing holding you back. But I could never afford a trip to Paris, I said. You could work your way over on a cargo boat, Sheila said. You could stow away on a plane. You could apply for a government grant. I told her I had too many ties here. I couldn't go, just like that. Sheila thought I should quit my job and move into a garret right here in York. You love to draw, she said. You're too young to get saddled with a 9-to-5 job and a house in the suburbs with Brian Trewin. Do what you want for a while. Who knows? You may even make it as a great artist. But I wasn't sure you could have that sort of life here in York. Paris, yes, I'd be shoulder to shoulder with all the other impoverished daubers, but here? Sheila thought giving the legal profession a year of my life was quite sufficient. I said, but what? Sheila mocked me, saying, I know, what will your parents say? I knew Dad would go through the roof. Mum. Well, we all know what mums are like. If you're scared of quitting, try taking a holiday, live as an artist for 3 weeks. See if you like it. Sheila again interrupting my thoughts. No, you're right, I said. If I am going to be a painter in a garret, I have to be in a garret, not just pretending for 3 weeks. Right? I've decided. I'm quitting my job tomorrow. Sheila asked me what sort of notice did I have to give. I said 2 weeks, I think. Will you help me look for a room? Whenever you like, she said. Well, see you, babe. Good luck with your notice, and your parents. Chapter 3. Next day, Sunday, Brian took my mother and me to morning mass. Sitting, kneeling, or standing in the pew, I found my mind drifting. Here I am, I thought, playing the role of the nice girl to the hilt. As our red-faced priest led a prayer for the Queen and the sick, I visualized Marian, posing for me, dressed as Mark Antony in a white toga, and holding a golden shield against his hip. Oh, God, I prayed, give me courage to quit my job and move out of my house and do what I really want to do. Next day, I waited on the corner for the bus, just as I did every weekday, but this time I could look at all the people who waited with me and smile to myself. I wouldn't be shivering with them much longer. When I got on the bus and found a place between a fur-trimmed woman and a postman who were there every day, I didn't say a word to them. All I could do was smile and think of the days of bus-less bliss that lay ahead of me. I wasn't a bit depressed by the jostling and jarring as we headed noisily to the city center along the familiar obstacle course of morning traffic. Getting off the bus, I joined the 8 p.m. wave of workers who rushed to be at their desks on time. It felt very odd to be among them and yet not be one of them anymore, like a tiddler going upstream with the salmon just for the ride. It was like any other Monday at Hancock and Miller's. I walked dutifully into the office and went about my work, trying to be my business as usual self. A couple of the solicitors had me get clients' securities out of the safe and put them in good shape, endorsed and ready for redrafting. People questioned me about filing problems. Clients came in to pick up legal papers. I kept busy, but I couldn't forget this was D-Day, the quitting day. At midday, I went to the bank. This was Barclays on Micklegate. I walked up to the counter, and asked the young man if I could have an update on my current account. I watched him go to find the information, he had so much charm. I'd often wished he'd ask me out. The story was that he lived in his own flat and that placed him in a far more sophisticated class than I was in. "Is it nice out?" he asked me, as he handed me a piece of paper with the account balance on. I was tempted to give my brother Robert's standard reply, "Yes, in fact, I think I'll leave it out." Instead I gave my type of answer, "It's as nice as you can expect this time of the year." I smiled and turned to take my checkbook to one of the tables the bank provided for writing checks and filling out deposit slips. Even though the bank clerk himself had just written the figures, I liked to be away from him when I looked at them. Privacy was important to banking. My up-to-date balance showed £354.8, a fortune amassed over 8 years of delivering newspapers, several summers of odd jobs and a year and a half at Hancock and Miller's. It was enough to get me started. I withdrew £100. By 2 o'clock I had done nothing about quitting. Mr. Dixon came to my desk. "Babe," he said in his strong radio announcer's voice, "I gave you a house deed to look over, did you check it?" "Yes, sir." "What did you learn?" "I learned that the people are buying a house that has had 22 previous owners, and that it is over 300 years old." "What conclusions have you made about whether this aforesaid property is a good investment or no?" "None, sir, none." "None. Have you no thoughts on the matter?" "Well, our client's profession is fancy cakes, correct?" "Yes, so." "I don't like cream cakes, they give me indigestion." "Then your indigestion is holding us up. And we can't be held up. I want a complete analysis of the proposed purchase, by first thing in the morning." Mr. Dixon read and boiled, stormed away, cursing me under his breath. Left in his wake, I now felt more like resigning. I got up from my desk and marched towards Mr. Hayes's office. There sat his secretary. She was a tweedy woman in her 50s who looked out of place behind a typewriter. She belonged behind a pair of knitting needles, producing woolen gloves for underprivileged children. "What is it you want?" she asked me. "I wish to see Mr. Hayes." "But it's quite confidential, if you don't mind," I said. Miss Lynch picked up the intercom telephone and buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry to bother you, but well, it's Babe, she'd like to see you," she said sweetly enough for him but with a scowl to show me her annoyance. I distinctly heard him say who. "You know, Babe, the girl who, yes, that's her." "You may go in," she said. I entered Mr. Hayes's office and closed the door behind me. This was usually called being on the carpet, but the broadloom was so thick that I felt in it rather than on it. The office was immense, but Mr. Hayes was easy to find since he looked so impressive, brilliant, and rich. He sat tall behind his kidney-shaped desk. Glancing around me, I realized how seldom I'd been in this room. To be truthful, never. The founder solicitors in portraits on the wall looked like those Cough Sweet family adverts. There were a number of upholstered chairs, a high window, 2 filing cabinets and a set of shelves filled with law books, and strangely enough books on how to sell things. And there was a thriving potted plant that stood like a green sentinel beside the tidy, well-polished desk. But I had to stare at the man behind the desk. Funny how some people just look their professions. I'm sure people would have needed just one glance at Winston Churchill and they'd have said there is a leader of men. I looked at Mr. Hayes and thought there is a solicitor. All right, he said, and he finished signing something, probably a check for £100,000. What's on your mind? It's just that I want to resign, I said. That cut through all the pleasantries we might have indulged in. So, you want to resign? Just supposing we all resigned, walked out to be a disc jockey or whatever. I don't want to be a disc jockey, I said. Hayes thought that whatever bothered me, could be easily smoothed over. If people can look daggers, then he was stabbing me to death. I just want to resign and try something else. This is just a whim, you'll get over it. I hate the legal business and I want to be an artist in an attic. I feel I've been mistreated, I told him. I stopped talking, my tongue was running off. Go on, he said. Well, sir, you know it's my job to check all documents before they go out. Yes, said Mr. Hayes, and your work is very satisfactory. The staff tell me that they've never seen the firm stamp printed so squarely and neatly on the documents. Well, sir, I said, making my face as blank as I could, I've been given a conveyance document today, to check it and our client's credentials, and then been ordered to eat fancy cream cakes for purposes of research. I thought that would have been outside my job description. He looked taken aback, and if ever a face was nonplussed, his was. Ah. Well, might as well be hung for a cow as a calf. I don't like that strong tea or those plain biscuits we are served at 11 every day. He told me that was completely out of his province. Under the circumstances, if I had to keep eating those biscuits, it would be impossible to stay with the company a minute longer. I was just about to leave. Wait a moment, young lady, I stopped by the paneled door. You can't leave, he said, you've got to give notice. Sorry. I said, I feel the way caged lions must feel, how easy to say goodbye to a prison. I got up. My nerves and legs felt taut. I walked briskly out of his office. Mr. Dixon was waiting. Wait, he cried, scrambling after me. I've heard from Miss Lynch, and you can't leave us with our tits in the mangle, you've got to give a month's notice. Dixon. I heard Mr. Hayes say in his stern, impressive voice, you come into my office at once, and tell me all about this business of asking our young lady clerks to eat cream cakes, that is, if you can speak without taking your vocabulary from the gutter. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I got my coat and left before anyone stopped to ask me what had happened. I walked through the brass-handled doors, onto the high street. The lioness was out of the cage at last. Chapter 4. Wandering rather aimlessly along the street, I came to one of the many narrow cafes you could find all over the city, the ones with the tattered, typewritten menus and the chipped plastic counters. I went in and sat down to a toasted crumpet, happy to be alone. I was only on my second bite when a friend of mine slid into the chair beside me. Babe, nice to see you, said Tilly Edwards, a shorthand typist and an exuberant girl, if ever I knew one. Nice place to find you. I notice they have terrific caviar and scrambled eggs here. Whenever I saw Tilly, which was very infrequently these days, she'd make these silly ironic statements which we used to call the Fulford slang because we believed our suburb was the only place that used it. On a blizzardly morning we'd say nice spring day. I notice it sounded childish to me now, and I wondered if Tilly spoke that way in her office. My typewriter ribbon is worn out, I notice. I just dropped in for a snack, I said. It's close to Hancock and Miller's, I heard, said Tilly. I notice it's quite normal to go miles away for a tea break. Real slave driver you work for, putting you through the grinder like this. Making a huge decision about where to deliver your briefs. I bet she fell about at that. 19. I forced a grin. Well, I notice you're not lucky to work in stocks and bonds. I'd not be in that business even if I wasn't a PA. Hey. Things haven't been going my way. I haven't got a boyfriend, well, not really, you notice. Though I did meet some chap coming in on the bus the other week. His father's a real tramp, doesn't own half of the city. He failed to like me, so he didn't bother to come here and visit me the other day. She leaned toward me confidentially. Of course, my terrible-looking boyfriend knows all about him, I notice. Well, this rake chap and I didn't get tiddly down the pub, and he didn't get very pash. Oh, no. I refused to go into the bedroom with him. He didn't grab me under the coats, I notice. So, he didn't go all the way. I said. No, I notice. Tilly gritted her teeth and rammed her right fist into her left palm. She laughed raucously. Want something? The man at the cash register called to her. Yes, I do, laughed Tilly. She got off the chair and backed toward the door. Don't phone me sometime, I hate having a drink with my old friends. She stopped at the door. Hey, you'd hate my silly office, they don't put my name on the door. Ever poor, see. See you square. She turned and left. Finishing my snack, I paid the man who wore armbands on his shirt sleeves. He looked greedily at my 10-bob note. I imagined that everyone would look greedy, now that I didn't have a regular income. Outside, I was thankful that it wasn't too cold. I didn't want to go home until the usual knocking off time. Meeting Tilly had depressed me. I hadn't even had the guts to tell her what I was going to do. Not chicken, I notice. Chapter 5. I walked under the bare trees, safe in the knowledge that all the birds had gone south. I lingered near the Guildhall, recalling the chattering and chirrup of the summertime birds, admiring the handsome, yet grotesque, heart-warming building. After dinner at home, where I spoke animatedly about cream cakes and conveyancing without saying anything about throwing in my job, I phoned Sheila. Later, we met on the corner of Paragon and Fishergate. Well, I did it, I told her. Good for you. How much notice did you have to give? None. I walked out on them. I'm free. Want to go and look at garrets? Sheila did her American thing. Sure thing, kid. We unfolded a street map. Sheila looked thoughtful and then asked me what area did I want to live in? I think it has to be on the left bank of the river. The river Ouse isn't exactly the Seine, is it? Sheila said. Never mind. Which is the left bank? How do you work it out? Well, I said you face the river, and the bank on your left is the left bank. Sheila didn't look too sure about this. How far away from the river can you be, and still be on the left bank? Let's see, these streets here. I looked at the map. I'd call them all left bank. Okay, if you say so. Let's go, I'm freezing standing here. We walked into the next street in silence, broken only by Sheila's cigarette cough. We plodded along Castle Mill Bridge in our high heels. The rain wasn't quite pouring down, but it threatened us with drizzly warnings. But I was so keyed up that I hardly noticed where we trudged. As we got to Coney Street, we found lots of people loitering outside a cinema, the snooker hall, cafes and pubs, and the second-hand clothing shop, despite the cold weather. I suppose some had been born in other northern cities and had come here expecting these muddy white streets to be greener. Many had likely lived here all their lives. Some were dressed in gifts from the Salvation Army and discards from Oxfam, some drunk, some doped up on pot, some shy, some rough and rugged, some weak, some without friends, some without homes, some hungry, some afraid, and some just down at heel. An occasional bank manager came out of a door, looking serious and prosperous and healthy, but then a woman in a torn coat and a bright green dress would walk past and put the scene back in order. We saw 2 or 3 men picking up discarded cigarette packets, another man standing in a doorway making a speech about nothing, an old man in a threadbare coat throwing up between buildings, and 2 beefy men in tartan shirts starting a fight. Policemen patrolled in pairs. We passed another cinema that was so covered in gaudy posters that you had to look hard to find the box office. We passed a badly lit hotel, a dingy restaurant and a large group of grumbling men. I have to admit that I was a bit scared, but if I was going to lead the bohemian life, this was surely where I'd find it. We turned off into Queen Street near the railway station. We hadn't spoken, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Sheila turned to me with a tiny half-smile that reminded me of both the Mona Lisa and the Cheshire Cat. "Keep your eyes open for furnished rooms signs," she said. "Your career as an artist is about to begin." The third house on the left in the next street had a sign "Guest House and Vacancies, Apply Within," nailed to a fence in front of a narrow 3-story house that looked as if it had been wedged between its neighbors by a giant mallet. I took a deep breath of the damp air. The garden gate was stuck, so we climbed over. I knocked on the bright blue door. 22. "Do you want to do the talking?" Sheila asked me. "You take the first one, I'll let you know if I like it." The small man who opened the door looked like a drowned Yorkshire Terrier who'd been pegged out on a line to dry. "Brenda's boarding house, can we help you?" Sheila said that we wanted to see one of the rooms they were advertising. "Sorry, only one lady to a room," said the man. "It's for my friend, not both of us," Sheila told him. "Don't she talk then?" asked the man. "Not unless the occasion warrants it," I said. Wait on, this is a boarding house," said the man. "Yes, my friend only wants the room, not the board. She has to eat with the rest of us." "I suppose she might eat here," said Sheila. "Can we see the room?" The man wasn't sure about this either. "But supposed we could?" "But I tell you," he said, "having a woman around the house who don't talk would give me the creeps." "Come on in then, remember though, you gotta eat here." I thought it might be necessary to be small and bony to live in such a narrow house. We entered the hall, full of bikes and old newspapers. "I'm stuck, I can't get through," I cried. "She can talk," quipped the man. "Come on babe, we've made it through," said Sheila. "You don't have to live here, get me out." They pulled me through the gap, bits of pink plaster came with me. "For a lady that don't talk," said the man, "you sure enough can make a mess." I said it wasn't my fault that the passage was narrow. We followed him in, past a tiny living room where a radio blared and a pair of blue-jeaned legs started thumping on the back of a toffee-colored Chesterfield, keeping time with Elvis and "Don't Be Cruel." We went up some stairs with a broken banister between the chimney and the wall. Sheila followed him. I went next. We entered a rose wallpapered room, where there was an iron bed, on casters, a lumpy mattress, a mirror, and a basin. "Not bad, you could set up your easel over there," said Sheila. "Easel," said the man, "you mean she's a drawer?" "Oh, yes, she's top drawer." Sheila was ever the wit. "Well?" asked the man. I told him I didn't care for the room, too bare, and it faced south. "We artists need northern light, you know." "Fussy, ain't she?" said the man, who I now took to be the landlord. "This is not what we want," I said. "Could you show us another room?" "That's the best we have, madam. Fancy drawers." "I don't need the best. I don't like it is all." 24. The man bellowed. "Brenda." A few moments later a woman appeared from a steamy kitchen who was so fat that not only could she never have squeezed through that hall, she could hardly fit into the main floor area. In her chubby fists she clutched a broom. "Yeah. We got ourselves another couple of sightseers," the man again. "I show them the room, and you know what, they don't want board. Big Brenda asked us if we were kissin' the place. You ladies better get the hell out of the street, before I knock you into the... We have every right not to like." Sheila did not complete the sentence. "This one here says that one there, is a drawer. Bren, would you say she looks like a drawer?" "Drawer? Drawer. We don't want no fucking artist," said Brenda. "Now scoot." She was waving the broom as if it was a fly swatter when the blue-jeaned legs appeared, this time with their owner, a lean white-faced teenaged girl with stringy hair and a plentiful collection of pimples. "Hey, man, you wanna hear some way out sounds?" she asked me. "No, Marilyn, they're just leaving," Brenda snorted. "Some guest house," I said. We hurried out of there just in time to avoid the descending broom which connected with the closing door. 25 Chapter 6. Next morning, I woke up at my regular time of 7:30, and realized that I had nowhere to go. It seemed absurd to struggle out of bed when it was so warm and cozy there. I thought about the night before. After Brenda's farewell, we'd gone to one more house where a man with no left leg showed us a room stacked with curtains, cushions and furniture covers. It was hard to breathe in there. We gave up for the evening and went to a pub, where Sheila talked about her job. Then, the fireworks. Babe. Babe. You'll be late. My mother's loudest calling voice rolled down the hall and up the stairs and through my door. I slid out of bed and meandered into the bathroom. After I'd cleaned my teeth, had a shower, I was automatically about to apply a little makeup, and then realized I didn't have to. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I remembered one of the questions on the aptitude test that the meat company had sent me. What do you think to yourself when you look in a mirror? Rumor had it that the right answer for getting the job was hello, you gorgeous creature you. That never seemed to be my thought in front of a mirror. Back in my room, I wondered if I should dress in a skirt and continue the charade of going to work. Or should I put on casual stuff and saunter to the breakfast table? That would hit them with the full force of the new me. Well, I had showered. That was one step toward continuing the game. I fingered the sleeve of my blue denim shirt, hanging there in the wardrobe that Dad had built because this room didn't have a hanging space. I looked over at my desk. It had seen both me and my brother through university. Beside it was a cardboard box full of vintage photoplays, including my favorite ones with Alan Ladd, and comics with Tarzan and Jane, King and Queen of the Jungle. My drawings of men were always influenced by the shapely chap, whose legs kept stepping out of the comic strip panels. On the other side of the bed was a small bookcase. Lying on top of my university texts was my latest acquisition, Tarzan and Jane in New York. In one corner was the ham radio outfit that my brother used to operate every night for over a year. We still had his wooden aerial tower in the back garden. It struck me that there were more traces of my brother around the house than there was of me, and he didn't live here anymore. He'd got married and moved on. I decided against a skirt. Bae, you'll miss your bus. Be there in a minute, Mom. I strode into the kitchen. I was changing into my flares, tucking my blue shirt in. Morning, I said. Dad was bent over his bacon. My boiled egg sat there cooling. My mother, who usually ate her breakfast after we'd gone, stood at the sink. What's this? She asked. She looked at me, her questioning gaze taking in my outfit. She was running water into a pan and the noise continued as I sat down. When I started to speak, she turned it off. It's casual day at the office, I told her. It's what? Don't be bloody daft, girl. This was Dad. He didn't like me to fool around when they expected a straight answer. My mother tried to keep the peace. Now, Father, don't go getting angry. You know these companies will do strange things for business these days. They will. Dad said. Get on with your breakfast, babe, or you'll miss the bus. It's late, you know. I don't think I'll be going to work today. My hands tightened on the butter knife as my stomach did flips, and I prepared for the family crisis. What's all this about, babe? Said my mom. Are you not well? Dad wanted to know if all this had anything to do with Sheila. What's her background? He said. In a way, it is to do with her, I said. Why? I don't like the sound of this. She's leading you astray. My mother reminded Dad that I was over 18, and old enough to pick my own friends. That's it? Side with her. Look at her, look at them trousers. Shameful. 28. Dad, you know how I like to paint. We been through all this before. I told you, it's a good hobby. I told them I'd decided to devote full time to it. That I'd quit my job. They both yelled, what? Hold on, young woman, said Dad. Do you mean to tell me you've quit Hancock and Miller's, with no other job to go to? Yes, I told him. Have you no self-esteem? This was my mother. Now, my parents thought self-esteem was produced by education and hard work. They couldn't see what disqualified me was temperament. Dad then asked the £64,000 question. And you're going to draw, all day? Yes. Well, I know yes was inadequate, but that was all I could say really. After all I've said about working class girls becoming artists. Are you working class then, Dad? I asked him. No, certainly not, he replied. Middle of the road me, I suppose. My mother spoke up. I won't have you around here all day, getting in the way. You've got to earn your keep, babe. Speak to her, Dad. I'm trying to, aren't I? Dad's Yorkshire upbringing came through loud and clear. Look, babe, if you are serious about this and not bloody joking, then you'd better get out of this house and stay out. 29. Dad trying to play the Victorian father was a laugh. At that moment I relished the idea of being thrown out. It added piquancy to my whole plan. Dad himself had often said that the most successful people got going, only after a good kick in the backside. If that's the way you want it, I'll get my stuff together and move out of here today. Oh, do sit down and finish your breakfast first, said my mother. The decision's made, Mum. Mum looked panic-stricken, there among her pots, pans and appliances. Look here, said my father, do you mean you're leaving that bloody good job I got you? You sure you weren't fired? I resigned, yesterday. Dad looked if he might exit from this family scene. My mum asked him where he was going. Somebody has to work around here. My mother pointed out that he hadn't eaten his egg or finished his bacon. I once read, for those you make friends, and give your heart to, when once they perceive the least rub in your fortunes, fall away, like water from ye, are found again. I thought that very appropriate in the circumstances. Sheila telephoned, saying she'd made an appointment for me to see Downing at the Fine Arts Department. He'd see me at his house at 10 this morning. She thought I might be able to pick up a few tips. She'd told him I was a budding genius. 30 Thanks, I said. You're welcome, said Sheila. I haven't told him what you intend to do, it'll be interesting to see how he reacts. I'm not sure I wanted to see anyone from Fine Arts, but what the hell. Chapter 7. I went to see Downing. I rang his doorbell. Immediately I heard a dog bound to the door, where it barked and scratched, muffling the sound of approaching human feet. The door opened. The head of a bespectacled man appeared and a red-eyed, yellow-haired mongrel leapt out into the front garden. You must be, said the man. I'm Downing, you're very punctual. Won't you come in? He sat in a leather armchair. He wore a suit, shirt, and tie, but was barefoot. Your friend Sheila had some good words to say about you. Did you bring any of your work with you? No, I forgot, I said. At that moment the mangy mongrel dog bounded into the room, put its forepaws up on me and started licking my face. Downing seemed to be slightly perturbed, not by the dog's lack of manners but by my lack of grace in receiving the dog's welcome. The studious-looking Downing was not my idea of a bachelor dog lover. He would have been more at home with a chinless, tea-pouring wife and 2 grubby children. He seemed so oblivious to noise, yet how could he be oblivious to this bounding, barking, sportive mutt? That's a terrible scar he's got on his ear, I said. Yes, said Downing, he has periods of mental depression and insanity, like Van Gogh, you know. One day he got his ear between his paw and the floor and tried to rip it off. Poor, what's his name? Gauguin, Downing told me. That's nice, I said. Good dog, Gauguin. Downing asked me to sit down. I sat opposite him, whilst he tried to shove his feet into a pair of old slippers. He kicked one away in disgust. Both right feet. This dog of mine always steals my left ones, a real socialist, you know. You should call him Trotsky, I said. What? Nothing, I said. Downing was sat down opposite me, one foot in a slipper and the other bare. I noticed his toes were unusually dexterous. He was snapping the largest 2 together impatiently. The living room, didn't invite living and lacked any real room. This was no ordinary, musty bachelor flat showing signs of hurried and impatient attempts at cleaning. This place was downright dirty. There were old newspapers littering all the furniture, chewed and bloody dog bones on the shabby rug, creased art publications lying askew in three corners, an old-fashioned console radio with teeth marks on the frame and shattered glass over the dial, two old shoes, 4 or 5 bookcases, stuffed with journals and reference books, an apple core, 2 Corot prints, 2 brimming waste paper baskets, a stamp album, a sofa with a dislodged spring, a grotesque rocking chair, 2 lamps that looked like vases wearing hats, a magazine rack, and several heaps of notes which were either unpublished theses or student papers. Not sure how to react to this disorganized scene, I could only pat the tyke's bobbing wide-eyed head and say nice doggy as it started on my socks, wagging his tail all the while. Now, said Downing, since you neglected to bring any examples of your work with you, you'll have to dash off something for me, so that I can see your potential. To what do you aspire? Do you wish to emulate the old masters, or are you a modern? I'd like to be a realist. I'm thinking of going in for art full-time. Well, babe, that's what they call you, is it? Yes, I told him. Well, babe, when I first saw you, I didn't think you were the type with the desire, the devotion to art. Do you intend going back to university to pursue your studies? Well, not exactly, I said. I knew I had aroused the professor's interest by giving him the wrong impressions about my future. I wished I could explain myself better, but, what with that moth-eaten mud chewing at my clothes, I could hardly think straight. Not exactly, he queried. You see, sir, I graduated with a BA, then went to work in a law office, but I always liked to draw, and when I met Sheila, she encouraged me to devote more time to it. She said she knew you. And you might give me a few tips on how to get started. Ah, on your art education, is that it? Said Downing. That's what you're trying to say, isn't it? The dog grew vicious. Oh, no. Go gone. Don't pull like that, you'll tear my skirt. Downing pulled the dog off me. Thank you, sir, I do want to further my art education. I know it's been neglected, and that's why I'm going to do, sort of. He looked hopeful. Ah, you're coming back to university full-time. No, I told him. At this the dog lunged at me once more. I moved my leg, so this time his teeth sank into the chair cushion. What are you going to do then, go back to infants' school? Roared Downing. I grinned. There was a silence, except for the dog, who was now ripping the cushion to shreds. Who is your favorite artist? Well, sir, I like, Gauguin. Do you? No, sir. I was speaking to the dog, he nipped my leg. He does that, take no notice, he's becoming egotistical. I then told him that I like Picasso quite a lot. 34 That old fraud. Coffee. Please. He boiled some water and dropped a half teaspoonful of instant coffee into each cracked cup. There were no saucers. The kitchen was as littered as the living room. I like Renoir a lot, I said. Renoir. Yes, that panderer of sentimentality. A painter of chocolate boxes. Surely your taste in art runs beyond that. I sipped my coffee. By now I was quite hungry, but Downing provided no biscuits or fruitcake. The dog, however, was more fortunate. The professor took a box of colored dog biscuits, and started plying the dog with one after another. It made me cringe to watch that mutt's disgusting mouth greedily accepting every biscuit. Was he deliberately being rude by feeding Gauguin and not me? No, I think that the dog was just more important. Now, let me get this right. Do you mean that with your limited academic background, you actually intend to paint? Yes. I intend to paint in seclusion right here in York. I am going to move into a left bank studio, with a man to pose and amuse me. Downing laughed. Ha, ha. The left bank, here in York. Start my art career, tomorrow. Downing waved his arms at the bookcase. See these? These represent years of labor to become educated. I did not get to be a professor of fine art by daubing on an old canvas in a garret, and I did not get to be a professor of art by living with some sweet little thing with big breasts. I read and I read. I can pick out a Goya or a Van Dyck, from any national gallery at 100 feet. I only became educated because I studied, and studied hard. Professor, what type of painting do you do? He stood up, his mouth agape. The dog ran under a chair. You know so much about art, I said, but you? What do you do? Babe, my dear girl, theory is the thing. With theory you can paint anything, all you need is the initial knowledge. Professor Downing, I don't give a damn about theory. I am going to paint what I see. Downing sank into his chair. As he did so he whispered, Go gone, kill. The dog leapt at me, I jumped back, crashing into a wall of books, bringing them down. The dog brought down a torrent of he-literature. He yelped as the history of art in 10 volumes hit him. I managed to dodge most of the heavy artillery, and only got a penguin paperback of Tintoretto in the back of the head, but trying to avoid the other volumes, I had to catapult myself into another section of shelves. These teetered and fell. Books tumbled, everything. A squealing Gauguin darted into a cupboard. I escaped, grabbed my coat and fled, allowing myself a backward glance at the turmoil. Crestfallen on the chair and immersed in books that had educated him, was the poor professor. I noticed the letters of Vincent van Gogh published in 3 volumes winking from their new home in the battered dog biscuit box. Once outside in the air, I ran into the street. I was free to be the kind of artist I wanted to be, whatever kind of artist that was, whenever I wanted to start. I felt ecstatic. I began to whirl around, throwing my arms up to the clear blue sky. I whirled until I began to feel dizzy and collapsed on the road curb, laughing like a lunatic. In fact, I nearly wet myself laughing. Later in the tea shop I saw Sheila. Chapter 8. How did it go with Downing? Sheila asked me. Great, he got mad when I told him what I wanted to do. Things did get a bit out of hand, sort of. He's not a friend of yours, is he? Why? Asked Sheila. I knocked over his bookshelves. Sheila thought that was terrific. One told her I'd like to forget about it. She wanted to know more. Was he hopping mad? I said I ought to go. No, no, I've got several places for you to see. 10 minutes later we were confronted by a woman with hair in curlers. Guess what? Said the lady in curlers 2 weeks ago, dis fellow moves in here, just for a couple of days, shaken with the booze, dried out, right in this room. And do you know, I found out he's a priest. Perhaps his spirit is still lurking about, said Sheila. What? There was no skylight. No dangling light bulb. I said I thought we should look at other places. Good enough for man of God, not good enough for you. The woman kept shrugging as we left. I liked the room, said Sheila. I must not get impatient, I said. Sheila smiled as she lighted her 5th cigarette of the evening. The next house looked wider than the others we'd seen. A crooked wrought iron fence ran across the front. We trod carefully on the slippery concrete steps up to a door that was hanging rather oddly on its hinges. The house could have once been called a mansion by some optimist, but it was now just a run-down guest house, stripped of most of its paint and all of its owner's pride. Great, Sheila said. Right in the middle of the mainstream of real life. I knocked. Our next landlord was equipped with a hearing aid and a woodbine-stained vest. Yeah, he shouted in a voice I can only describe as old and rattly. I didn't think he'd seen us yet because he seemed to be talking to a tweed overcoat hanging inside the door. We're over here, I said. We'd like to see the room you have in the attic. We're interested in renting it. he said, pointing to his hearing aid. Sheila shouted back, "We'd like to see the room." Pointing to his hearing aid again, he shouted back, "You'll have to speak up." Sheila shouted, "Mr. Marriott. Why you telling me that? I know my name, you know." "Sorry, of course you do." It was my turn to shout, "Mr. Marriott, we want to see your attic. I'll pay rent in advance, if I like it." "Come on in," Mr. Marriott said. Before he let us enter, he spat past us out into the front garden. We followed him inside, past a yellow-painted, carved wooden archway leading into an old-fashioned living room that looked all antimacassars on furniture and plates on wall racks. We went up a flight of steep stairs, ducking under irregular globs of plaster and stepping into a second-floor hall. 7 doors faced us. Pulling and speaking in barely perceptible noises, Mr. Marriott managed to convey to us that 4 of the doors were entrances to tenants' rooms. The 5th opened on the toilet, the 6th on a basin and bath. The 7th was set in the wall a foot above the floor. Mr. Marriott slowly opened it. Behind the door was a narrow stairway that might have passed for a ladder in most circles. This took us, very gradually because of Mr. Marriott's tortoise pace, to the room under the eaves. Marriott led us in. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. A bed, a small dresser. 2 painted orange boxes. 39 and a framed print of a ship on a ghostly sea, and a calendar illustrated with a spectacular girl, posing beside a large American car. I looked at the calendar. August, 1947. Flies had used it as their graveyard. To one side, was a tiny fridge, circa 1951. A tiny belling cooker. A table. Most remarkable of all was the skylight covering about 30 feet of the sloping ceiling above the bed. 3 of the panes were cracked. A perfect garret, and it faced north. "I like it," I beamed. "When can I move in?" I tried shouting, "When can I move in?" Mr. Marriott was panting so hard that I thought he might die right there. "Tonight," he said. "Don't shout, I'm not deaf," I said. "Great, about 8 o'clock. About 8. You'll have to speak up," he said. "I'm a bit deaf." "Good, yeah. Good." Mr. Marriott's voice trailed off. His eyes fluttered and he slumped against the wall. Sheila asked me to give her a hand with him, as we had to get him downstairs. I was alarmed, but we carried the poor old man down to the main floor where we laid his frail body on the sofa, 2 cushions under his head. "It's the old ticker Marriott told us gives out every now and again. Medicine in my pocket." Sheila looked in his right-hand waistcoat pocket, and I tried the left. She found a small bottle of whiskey. "That's it? You're good girls. We give him a slug. Sheila said he'd be fine. I thought I'd better go home and pack." I gave Mr. Marriott the rent. He took a key from around his neck, and gave it to me. He then relaxed back onto the floor, drinking his whiskey. "Thank you, Mr. Marriott, see you later," I said. We left him to his comforts. Sheila said this new life would save me from the comforts of my middle-class white Anglo-Yorkshire Protestant background. She thought it may be rescuing me from it all just in time. "I'm Catholic," I said. "Really? I never knew." "Well, you're still white and middle class." We walked around for a while, talking about my plans until we were freezing. After 2 hot chocolates in a cafe, Sheila left me and I wandered over to Woolworth's, killing time until I met Brian. As I approached his offices, an empty taxi passed. On an impulse, I flagged it down. The cab would be nicely distracting. I told the driver to wait until Brian came out. When he appeared in the doorway, he looked pretty good. As I watched him look around for me, I wanted to marry him. At that moment it seemed totally insane for me to think of moving into that big old house with that dying old man. Brian looked young, good-looking, and fresh. At that moment he seemed to be exactly the kind of man I could be happy with for the rest of my life. I opened the taxi door and stepped onto the curb. "Taxi, sir," I said to Brian. "What are you doing in a taxi?" he beamed. I held the door open for him as he stepped into the cab. "Extravagance. Is this your way of announcing a raise?" he said. He looked at me expectantly as I got in beside him. I liked the way he wore his hair, not too short, with a wavy bit at the front. "I have something to show you," I said, trying my best not to sound tragic. I wasn't sure he liked surprises. I told the driver the street name and we drove away. I put my arm around Brian and his bulky tweed coat, and nestled into him as if we were newlyweds being whisked off to the reception. Halfway there, he looked into my face with a happily suspicious expression that said, "What have you gone and done, you sneaky one, you?" I shuddered, and he must have mistaken this for ardor because he gave me a seductive look and placed his hand on my thigh. I always felt mischievous in the back seat of taxis. We clung to each other. I was clinging for the wrong reason, holding on because I wanted to protect him from the heartbreak I was going to cause him, or maybe holding on for one last clinch because I felt sorry for myself. Or, maybe I was hugging him close so I didn't have to look him in the face. When the taxi turned the street of old houses, he looked out blankly. I expect he wondered where on earth I was taking him. I stopped in front of the 2.5-story place with the crooked fence. His face was as full of questions as an exam paper. After telling the driver to wait, I guided Brian over the wet pavement, through to the front door, which was unlocked. I pushed through, past the living room where Mr. Marriott was loudly snoring, up the steep stairs, through the second-floor door, and up to the room, which looked incredibly dark and dingy now that the night was falling and causing the sky beyond the skylight to blend in with the indigo ceiling. I found the light switch string hanging from the dangling bulb and pulled it. I saw that Brian had turned white. He wore the same look of horror that had taken over his face the time we saw a documentary on the state of housing in Liverpool. "I've quit my job," I said. "I'm leaving home and I'm moving in here tonight. I'm going to be an artist, here, right here." Biting his upper lip, he ran from the room as if it had suddenly caught fire. I called his name as I ran downstairs after him, but he didn't answer. 2 doors opened as we ran past them, but I didn't get a look at the tenants. Brian ran out into the street and dove headfirst into the taxi. I stopped on the doorstep. When the cab driver bent to look at me through his front shield, I gave him a half-hearted wave that sent them on their way. Chapter 9. Taking a bus to my place, my parents' place, I found nobody home. I used my key, went in through the back door, and found a note on the kitchen table. It read, "We're over at your brother's for dinner. If you haven't had anything, there's a ham salad in the fridge. See you later, Mom." The note made me mad. Did my mother think I actually had no intention of moving out? I hurried to the basement for my suitcase, took it to my room and started packing. Sheila arrived 10 minutes later. I dumped my suitcase on the bed and started to pack a few things. Important things: my rag doll Sal, my yellow elephant Peter, made out of a discarded rug, my Paddington bear, and a multicolored clown called Pinch that grinned from ear to ear, and of course Sid, my teddy. My girlhood memories crowded in, but Sheila ran right over them. "Good God, babe, don't pack your teddy bear, you're an artist now, you're past all that. I may come back home for Sunday dinner." "No, no," Sheila said, "this has to be a clean break." I couldn't help reminding her that she still lived at home. True. But then I'm not an artist anyway, it's been my home all these years. They made me angry sometimes, but my mother does cook great meals and my father tells pretty good war stories. "You mean you don't hate them?" "No. They gave me everything I wanted." "Did you tell Brian yet?" "Yes, I did. I even showed him the room." "What did he say?" "Nothing. He just ran out. I think I broke his heart, I'm sorry. It's probably for the best. He wouldn't have been satisfied until I was chairman of the Law Society." We left the security of my old bedroom and walked down the unfriendly street. "Hey. Do you want to stop for food?" Sheila asked me. "What now?" "A cafe." "No, for goodness sake, groceries." "Will there be a shop open?" I asked. This was before the days of late-night shopping. Sheila pulled me into a small store with cardboard cigarette displays in the window. "What do you want for tomorrow's breakfast?" Sheila asked as we went in. "Let's see. I suppose, coffee, tea, I can manage on toast and marmalade. I'd never cooked a meal in my life. I've never even shopped for food. My mum always took care of that. I'd lived at home when I was at the university in York. It was only 4 bus stops away. I loaded oranges, cornflakes, bread, margarine, into a wire basket. Sheila found some sliced bread while I remembered you put milk in tea. As I watched the man pack my groceries into a plastic bag, I felt a pang of disappointment. My first step towards artistic individuality was a dull domestic chore. It started to snow as we walked to my new home. As we left the grocer's shop, a large snowflake landed on my nose. The sight of snow carried special meaning. A cold, bleak and lonely existence awaited me out there. How stupid could I get, giving up home and hearth for a shabby little room in the slum part of the city? We entered Mr. Marriott's premises. We climbed the stairs and entered my new room. I unlatched my suitcase. Out of it fell a small silver trophy. Sheila picked it up, and read the inscription: Ladies Dart Champion, The Plough, 1963. "Why have you brought this with you?" "Until I get an award for art, that's the only thing I've ever won." "But does it fit your idea of studio decor?" "Want to keep it," I said. "Where you going to put it?" On top of the fridge." Sheila shook her head. "I don't think so, babe." "Look," I said, "I can't drive a car. I can't do algebra, but I sure as hell can play darts." Okay. I have to go." "Do you still want to get a model?" 46. "I certainly do," I said. "Ah yes, and I want to interview applicants." "Do you think I should advertise?" "Not at first, if at all. I know at least 2 blokes who might do. One of them is someone you know." "That I know." Sheila smirked. "Oh, no," I said, "not Brian Kelly. He's a nipple tweaker." Sheila shook her head. "Could it be David the Teeth? He'd tried to bite my ears once." "I know, Peter. What's it?" "Who?" Sheila said. "You know, the zoology student." "Oh, the fella who's always scratching his—" "Yes, that's him," I said. "I thought he was engaged to that girl Bonnie, the one who keeps pet jellyfish." "No. One stung him when he tried to stroke it, he whacked it one. She cried and threw him out, broke off their engagement, so he went off and joined those monks in Wiltshire. He's out of harm's way anyway." Sheila said. "Yes. Who then?" "Patrick Vance. You met him once at the jazz club." "He was very nice," I said. "And very interested in you. I've lined him up for an interview tomorrow night." "Thursday." I must have sounded doubtful. "Yes, what's wrong? I can't do it Thursday. It's my darts night." Sheila sounded put out. "Come on, babe, you can't mean that. I can't let them down. You'll just have to set up the interviews for Friday night." "You'll have to forego Patrick." Sheila reminded me he goes to horror comic club meetings on Fridays. "Oh, yes, his mum once told me he had over 10,000 comics stacked in his sister's bedroom." "Not much room for his sister then." "No," I said, "they had to board her out. No room left for her bed." Sheila shrugged. "Well, I hope you're going to be an artist that plays darts and not a dart player that paints. Best of luck. Call me Friday. Confirm the interviews, I'll get some chaps along." "Good night, Sheila, and thanks for all your help." Sheila left. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I was on my own. I sat on the bed. After some moments of feeling melancholy, I got up and went to the fridge, trying not to think of being alone in Bohemia. I deposited my groceries in the fridge. Inside there was a bottle of gin. Where had it come from? A gift from Mr. Marriott? No, Sheila. That was more like it. She must have sneaked it in as a surprise. In the salad compartment were a few bottles of tonic water. I opened the gin, poured a drink, and sat back on the bed. I looked first at the calendar girl, then at the print of the ghostly galleon tossing on a turbulent sea. Soon I'd replace them with my own work. I wondered where the best place would be for my drawing table. My gaze drifted slowly over the walls and ceiling, noticing for the first time the damp marks and rough plaster, the holes, and the grease stains. I got up and picked at a lump of paint, and when it fell off it left a hole in the plaster. I sat back and finished my drink, quietly listening. Something, perhaps an animal, scratched between the eaves. Suddenly there was the sound of two radios, each turning the other's words into garble. Voices. Elvis breaking in with Now or Never plumbing sounds recurred with such amazing regularity that I wondered if a battalion of girl guides had stopped by to use the facilities. A woman's laughter rose and fell. Someone started to play a guitar and a cowboy kind of voice tried to carry a tune. A man shouted, "I've had you up to here," and a door slammed. A winter thump rattled the walls. I sat listening, wanting the voices to be my friends. I lay on the bed. Voices murmuring. A woman's voice. I got off the bed, put my ear to the floor. "Yes," said the voice. First I gave him the bit of chocolate cake out of my mouth, and it was leap year like now. Yes, 16 years ago, my God, after that long kiss I near lost my breath, sounded like Molly Bloom's soliloquy. I'd read James Joyce in my last year at university when I should have been reading Middlemarch. Then before I got sentimental, I thought I'd better finish unpacking. I found some space for my clothes, books, and my drawings. 49 Another gin forced me to venture down to the second floor toilet. Luckily it wasn't occupied. Once inside, I tried to lock the door but found that the lock didn't meet its slot in the wood. I looked down and saw that the toilet bowl was old-fashioned and rusty. I put down the wooden seat and it fell off the bowl rim with a crash. In desperation, I sat on the rim of the bowl, and held the door closed with my left knee and one outstretched hand. On the wall was written, "If I were a castaway, on the plains of Timbuktu, I would eat a missionary cassock, bands, and hymn book too." When I flushed the toilet, the water rose dangerously close to the brim and wouldn't go down. A plunger stood beside the bowl as if it was a necessary part of the operation. I used it and, miraculously, the water burped and receded. I paused in the hall to glance at each door. There seemed to be more laughter now, much of it male. No one came out. I went back to my room. Once I'd had another gin and tonic. I moved the suitcase to the floor and undressed and got into bed in my underclothes. My childhood, my years of school and university, and my brief legal career all passed before me. I thought about everyone I had ever known. Soon I realized the radios were silent and the voices had vanished. Sounds of the outside door closing and bottles clinking and feet shuffling reached me, but then there were no more. I thought of Brian. Where was he now? Traditional as he might be, I liked him. I could be with him now, snogging in his room while his parents watched TV below us. As hard as I could, I tried to remember his hair, and the taste of his mouth. I must not get sentimental. I turned out the bedside light. The blanket was itchy. I'd forgotten sheets. Alone, surrounded by strangers. What about cockroaches? Spiders? Mice? Sleepwalkers? Killers? Arsonists? Maniacs? Oh God! What kind of unsavory characters was I living with? Was the room filled with agile vampires perching on the skylight and peering at me? Tarantulas swinging onto the bed like hairy Tarzans, and scorpions poised like artillery in the corners? I was already beginning to find out that an artist's life is lonely. You can't share painting with anyone. You create alone. I knew what a lonely life I'd chosen. Heart racing, eyes wide, I held firm to the mattress until morning noises sneaked into the room. As dawn arrived, a radio blared a familiar tune. I fell asleep to Eartha Kitt's rendition of Santa Baby. Chapter 10. The plow shimmered with warmth, bright lights, and the smell of crisps and beer. 3 men were playing darts and I was the first of our team to arrive. I waved to the barman, hung coat on the back of a chair and sat down to marvel at the vastness of this establishment, with its 4 bars, the jukebox and the fruit machines. I had slept most of the day. About 2:30, Mr. Marriott sent a delivery man up to me with my drawing table. That set me moving. I had prunes, bread and butter and coffee, realizing that toast was well nigh impossible without a toaster. Later, in Debenham's store, I bought a toaster, 2 sheets, and a pillow. From Debenham's I went to a small cafe that specialized in fish cakes. Back in my attic, I set up my board under the skylight and taped a fresh piece of paper onto it. I sat at the board, staring at the paper until it was time to go to the darts match. Minutes before 8, the players arrived at the plow. Funny things about pubs, in the day they have an air of masculinity, but in the evening they become more feminine. Must be the little bowls of nuts and crisps they leave on the bar. Hi Joan, hello there Winnie, how's the leg, Phyllis? Hello Nettie. Hi, Sam. Evening Nell. How are you? Hello Maureen. Greetings and hallucinations. Good evening Glenn. There's Claudia. Did you know she's engaged, again? Hello Marie. Did you bring any pot? 6. Betty, you'll never guess what happened to Jamie's new puppy. Are we on the old dartboard again this week? Not a bad night out the other week. Hello, hello, hello she's here. Sandra. How did you make it so early? Hi there, Georgie girl, don't expect anything much from me tonight, I put my back out. Oh, yes, how'd you do that then? Bit of the naughties. Ha, ha, very funny. Is this the night we win the Magnum of Champers? They thronged into the pub, taking off coats, scarves, and sweaters, standing on one leg to put on sensible shoes for darts, the less agile sitting wherever they could to put on theirs. Teams were identified by their matching shirts. Our team was white with red trim, the red letters on the back spelling out our sponsor's name. The plow over the breast pocket of mine, written in red embroidery, was Babe. Players had no excuse for forgetting names. My team got nearest the bull, so started off first. I was last to throw. 3 others preceded me. From my seat by the scoreboard, I watched Moira wipe her hands on her towel and go into her classic delivery, her left foot turning within 1 inch of the throwing line, the other foot sticking out behind her like Mercury's. She got a double 4 to start, she followed it with 16 and a 5. I got excited by this. I jumped up, took a swig of lager, and practiced my throwing movement. I took up my place just off the mat, I concentrated on the board. My first dart hit the board and dropped to the floor. Sounds of disappointment from my team. Blushing, I aimed for a double 20. Eureka, my last dart got me a double 8. Not too bad. Playing darts turned my mind to Brian, so much so that I didn't worry about the game, and before I knew it my second turn had scored 124. No one asked me about my personal life and I didn't talk about it, I just enjoyed being there with everyone. No one even commented on the obvious fact that I wasn't wearing makeup. I led off my third turn with a triple 20, then a double 9. Jan, the Dart League secretary, checked my score and remarked, "Not pining for Brian, I see." I threw my last dart, a triple 9, my teammates applauded, one even slapped me on the back as I sat down, and looked at the chalk scoreboard. When I went up next time, I took extra care, not because I wanted to concentrate extra hard but because I was afraid I'd let the side down. After a series of good scores, a player can do something foolish like missing the board altogether. I threw the dart. Double 8. The next dash 10. My third hit the 20. Another good score. My team cheered. Even the team we were playing against started to pay attention. I barely noticed the wet kisses or the hard slap as I sat down. By now, the pub customers were coming over to watch, as they always do when there's a player on form. I don't know if they're vultures who want to watch the poor players first miss or if they truly want, deep down, to see them throw a high score. But seeing them moving over makes you extra conscious of what you're doing. You hear your teammates saying go on, keep throwing normal. It's like cricket when a batsman is on his way to a century. It's bad luck to mention the possibility too early in the game. I scratched my cheek. I felt self-conscious about the lack of makeup. I wish I'd put some on. But I had to get started on my new life somehow. Why did I have to have this excitement now? I wanted to be a recluse in a garret and suddenly everyone was watching me. By the time it was my throw again I was almost mesmerized. I stepped up to the mat. Taking my upright stance, I rotated my shoulders to loosen them up. I fidgeted the way a top player does, checking my shoes to be sure I hadn't stepped in anybody's spilled beer. I heard take your time, babe, lots of time, take your time, babe. I threw double 8. Next a 6, and then a 9. Everyone cheered. I grinned and shrugged as I walked into the midst of the little crowd to sit down. Several players gave me encouraging pats. All I could think of was, why tonight? Another part of me loved the attention. It was the kind of attention that I hoped to get as an artist. Besides, I told myself, there are countless players who miss a perfect game in the crucial last throw. Everyone was hushed, except for Sandra, who kept up her chatter. You can do it, kid, come on, girl, come on now, zing them darts, and a few others who nervously wanted to pretend it was business as usual for my benefit. As I stepped up for what could be the final throw, my heart was crashing through my chest. For some reason their team captain said, "Are you sure you're a darts player?" This said with a smirk to put me off. I slipped a little on the wet mat but held myself back, a fraction of an inch off the foul line. The dart hit the bullseye. The crowd roared. It was my first bull. I had to throw 2 more darts. I almost forgot to get kissed and slapped. I executed a smooth action and added a little extra follow-through. Double 20. When you have a string going, you can usually throw pretty automatically, but nervousness gets to you and you usually snap or jerk your arm, perhaps out of panic or maybe out of just plain fear of missing the board altogether. Everyone else was finished. I was the last player, get the last dart in the inner, and we'd won. Everyone was gathered around. I felt horrible. I was sick with anticipation and nervousness and wildly oscillating thoughts. I didn't want to throw a perfect dart because artists just don't do those things, and yet it was ridiculous to be this close and not want to finish the job. I wished with all my heart I didn't have to throw that last dart. Mechanically, likely seeming calm to all outward appearances, I lined myself up. I got set. I moved forward. Everyone was quiet. All I could hear was the rattle of beer glasses. Someone screamed as I let the dart go. That arrow went true to in the inner bull and I couldn't believe it. It's in, someone cried. The voices of the crowd lifted in one loud hooray, and people rushed at me, and all I could think of amidst the kisses and the handshakes was, I want to run out of here and tell Brian, and I want to tell my parents, but I can't. Hold it, don't go anywhere, the barman yelled at me as he reached for his telephone. I might be able to get the local press photographer down here, right away. Chapter 11. What on earth is your face doing on the sports page of our local rag? Sheila said. What on earth are you doing reading the sports page? I wanted to know. It was 5 p.m. Thursday when Sheila phoned and I had been at my drawing board, staring at the score sheet for our winning match. It was signed by the publican. My head was throbbing with a hangover. A few of the girls had taken me to Viv's to celebrate our game and I had lost count of the glasses of red wine I drank, but I know that someone, I think it was Mary Parley, a white-haired widow with a peculiar left arm throw, picked up some black label from an off-license. I got so drunk that they dared me to phone Brian and Enid. The call woke him up. He wasn't mad, but he wouldn't come over either. I think he might have if it hadn't been for the giggling in the background. I think he heard one of them say gangbang and that put him off. There's no doubt about it, I enjoyed the company of those girls. Even if I hadn't thrown the perfect dart, I'd have been glad of an excuse to get out with the gang. I was already beginning to find out that an artist's life is lonely. You can't share drawing with anyone. You create alone. I hadn't drawn a thing in my new surroundings and yet I already knew what a lonely life I'd chosen. Sheila phoned. How can the city's newest dart star have any credibility as an artist? Sheila asked. Art lovers don't read darts, right? UPS, I countered. Babe, I can't reconcile one with the other. If you're serious about art, you've got to give up darts. This cheap notoriety could harm you. Sheila, it was the perfect game. Like a century in cricket, a hole-in-one in golf. It's the thrill of a lifetime. There was a silence of nearly half a minute. Then Sheila spoke. For some strange reason, I have lined up 3 young men to be interviewed by you tonight. All have expressed an interest in moving in with you as your model. Not as your darts trainer. Her voice hurt my ear. I looked around to see if anyone had heard her. A second floor door slammed. Mr. Marriott was descending at the rate of 1 step an hour. But Sheila had a right to be angry. I'd forgotten that we had planned the interviews for that night. Say no more, I said. I need a model far more than a darts game. What time are they due? One at 8 o'clock, the second at 8:45, and the third at 9:30. Oh, and babe, try to get one out before the next arrives. I've explained to all 3 how to find your house. I hope you see one you like. I'm sure I will. I really appreciate your efforts, Sheila. Do me one favor. Before they arrive, hide that darts trophy. Until find a more suitable place for it, I told Sheila. She rang off. 58. I was beginning to have doubts about interviewing. I'd done it once before at the University Sketch Club. Seeing 16 and 17-year-olds who might be suitable as models. Most were scrawny, introverted, caught up in private mythologies, many exhibited a fierce, hostile intelligence. They all seemed to have great assurance about their absence of conviction. They were not eager to please, and they lacked charm. They were disturbing, making me ill at ease. They did not connect with anything in my experience. Not one of them had innocence, or the openness and physical presence I was looking for. It was a chilling thing, to see iron in such young souls. I was only 18 myself at the time, but felt 98. After bacon and eggs at a greasy spoon on Station Road, I giddily returned to my room. I nodded to a chap on the stairs, but he seemed too preoccupied to acknowledge me. His ski hat was pulled down over his eyes. I had no way of knowing if it was a tenant. I arranged the kitchen table and chairs in the center of the room, at right angles to the bed. I set one chair behind the table, one at the side. Good interviewers never sat the interviewee across the desk from them because it was psychologically bad. The table would act as a barrier. I wiped off the table. To cut down the formality, I scattered a few magazines on the table, 2 of them half covering the notepad I was going to write on. Placed cigarettes on the table, an ashtray. Interviewers always offered cigarettes to put applicants at ease. Applicants for sales jobs were usually turned down if they coughed while smoking or held the cigarette in the air, or smoked it down too close to the end or blew smoke at the interviewer. I think a lot of companies had turned me down because I had said no thank you, I don't smoke. I sharpened 2 pencils and let them lie any old way on the pad. I carefully placed an art book illustrated with Michelangelo paintings on the bed. It gave the place an aura of classy sensuality. I put the silver-plated trophy in the fridge. A few minutes after 8 the first applicant arrived. He was short and on the plump side, but his face was quite acceptable. "Good evening," he said, smiling. He was 6 minutes late. I wrote late on the notepad. His name was Tim Ball. Trying to sound authoritative, I asked him to be seated. "Cold night, eh?" I remarked. The important thing in interview technique is that you should always break the ice with pleasantries. "Yes," said Tim, "it is cold. I'm glad I wore 2 vests." "Quite," I said, somewhat puzzled. "I am Tim Ball, you are?" I didn't answer. "What is your name, please?" he asked me again. "Babe." "Ah, don't you have a?" "I never use it," I told him. "That's odd," he said. "Never underestimate the stimulation of eccentricity," I told him. "Oh, I'd never do that." "Now, you are applying for the position of model, is that correct?" He nodded, looking at my knees. I pulled at the hem of my skirt. "Now, I want it made clear that as an artist I am attempting to follow the good classical tradition of artist-model relationship." "Oh, yes," he smirked, "I saw Moulin Rouge." "Did you? Well, it is important that the applicant be told all the conditions of the work. You will not be paid much at first, your living may be quite uncomfortable for the first few weeks, until I sell something." I pushed the cigarettes towards him. "Smoke?" "Thank you, no." "Do you mind if I do?" "No, go right ahead." I lit the wrong end of a cigarette. Coughed. "What is your present job, if any?" "Me? I'm a waiter. I wait on tables." "Would you defend that occupation to the death?" I asked. He looked perplexed. "No. I suppose not." "No, I wouldn't." "Good," I doodled on my pad. "If we, and I use the corporate we, if we select you, will you leave your present job?" "I suppose," he replied. "Suppose, why?" "I have to stand up all day." "Do you realize," I said, "you might have to do a lot of standing as a model?" "I suppose so." "Well, do you think you'd like the life of an artist's model, Tim?" He leered. "I'd like a change." "I see. What type of upbringing have you had?" "I haven't been sick since the day I ate a pound of green plums at my granny's." "Sorry," I said, "I'm not with you." "No, you weren't. I wasn't dealing with Einstein here." "No, how were you brought up, raised?" "You mean like in poker?" "No," I said with a sigh, "let me put it another way. Did your parents love you?" "Oh yes. My dad used to lend me his toy soldiers. He'd also save some of his beer and sneak me a swig when my mother wasn't looking. He used to slap me now and again, but we got along all right, well, when it mattered. Like, for instance, when I was going somewhere special, he'd let me wear his Crombie overcoat." I was reminded that our mind is a genetic disease passed on by our parents. "You enjoyed life with your parents then?" "Oh, yes. My father also taught me poker, and blackjack." "What do you think of promiscuity?" I asked him. "What?" "You know, promiscuity." "Ah. I never make promises I can't keep." I became impatient. "Promiscuity means sleeping around. What do you think of sleeping around?" "Sleeping around what?" he said. "Around the clock." I couldn't do that. I am not a lazy person, even when I've been out late the night before. I thought I ought to move on. "Do you drink?" "Like a fish." "But you don't smoke?" "Only when I'm alone, takes my mind off the dark." He glanced up at the skylight. We both laughed. I tried again. "One final question, would you have enough patience to model for a painting?" "It depends what you're painting." "I suppose it does. One other thing, do you snore?" Oh no, Tim said with the kind of tone he might have used if I'd asked if he picked his toes. Without edge I said, that's good. Okay, we'll be in touch with you. Terrific. I asked if there was anything he wished to say to me. Only one thing. I'm married, but my poor wife drowned last summer. It was a week after she'd fallen in a bed of stinging nettles. I did not laugh, but said at least she didn't have to suffer with all that itching anymore. Exactly, said Tim. He rose from the table. Well, thank you. Good night. Good night, I said. He left. I recovered from Tim in time for the second applicant, who arrived 5 minutes early, a radiant James Hickey. He'd styled his hair a la Tony Curtis, circa 1960, and wore a shirt with Hollywood stitched on the breast pocket. Hello James, I said, good to see you. How are you? Very prescient, thank you. I had the feeling I'd get here early, and I did. I visualized 2 flights of stairs, and sure enough, there were. I even imagined there'd be a skylight, facing north. And there is. Now I have a feeling that I am going to be chosen for this position. I like the shirt, I said. Thank you, Miss. Babe. Won't you sit down? I will. What is your full name? James Fitz/Eelbert R. Hickey. What does the R stand for? I don't know, wise that I asked him. My birth certificate had ink blots on it. I thought one of the stains looked like an R, so I took the initial for myself. But have never decided what name beginning with R suited me, so I left it. As long as it wasn't going to turn out to be R for rat, I didn't care. My family dates back to the old Saxon kings of Britain. There wasn't much I could say to that, was there? Yes, I see, I said. You know, of course, what the position of live-in model entails. It conjures up all sorts of visions, not the least of which is one of infinite bliss, helping you achieve the stature of a famous and important artist. And I can't think of a more fitting setting than this wonderful old garret. Such a marvelous skylight. I asked him if he'd care for a cigarette. He nodded, then took out a cigarette holder from his pocket and expertly fitted the cigarette into it. I lit a match and held it for him, then fired my own cigarette. I took one drag, and placed it on the saucer I was using for an ashtray. You feel then, I said, that you would be doing the correct thing if you quit society to become, in effect, well, my lover? Certainly. In my most recent communication with the spirits, I was encouraged to act freely. I am sure that the spirits mean us to do what we truly believe in. I'm sure they do, I said. Just last week, when I spoke with my aunt, she told me life was too short to spend it bottling up all our primary needs and emotions. I felt that someday I should be an artist's model and lover, therefore I will be. 64. The look on his face was like a sexy milkman who was successfully blackmailing a suburban housewife. Do you have any interest in art? I asked him. I love people who draw. I think it would be so satisfying to have a talent like that. I've heard it said that York needs more culture. I am very much in favor of doing anything to help the arts. He gave me the kind of smile that I imagine suburban husbands give their wives when they wanted to start a family. I squirmed. What type of upbringing, I mean childhood, did you have? Wonderfully happy, he told me. Not only did my parents look after my food, clothing, and shelter, but they also gave me most of my education in the birds and bees, reincarnation, clairvoyance, and supernatural theory. They even paid my way through college. You went to college then? Oh yes, he said. Where? I asked him. Just college. I dropped the subject. What is your present job? I asked. I am a chef. School dinners. Primary school. Naturally, if I become your model and lover, I'd continue on with my job to help support you until you are well established. Well, that sounded a terrific idea. Now, do you have any habits you might call bad? I smoke a bit, as you can see, and occasionally I swear, but nothing worse than damn or hell. Sometimes I feel intense concentration coming over me, like a trance, and I have to sit perfectly still. That usually precedes any spiritual communication. And I like fondling, both inside and outside the clothing, above and below the waist. I know it's a throwback to my adolescence, when my mother told me that fondling was essential to cheer a girl up. Women are sometimes such taciturn creatures, a little fondling here and there seems to break down their inhibitions and gets at their true natures. I've noticed it so often, before we kissed and felt each other, girls I knew were always on edge, but after fondling, they relaxed and talked freely. There was no answer to that, so I said I see. Well, do you feel you have the grace and poise it takes to be a satisfactory model? Yes. One winter I went to a lady who taught me charm and deportment. I got so good at carrying books on my head, that the teacher said, "You must take up yoga," so I did. My yoga teacher said she could get me on the BBC radio. I said with an innocent smile. No, no, radio would be no good. Television. But I was more interested in mystical things than show business. But she taught me everything she knew about my body. She was very interested in me. We used to fondle quite a lot. It's important for my work that you have no outside romantic obligations, I said. Are you still involved with her? No. She was an eccentric person. She used to visit the railway station, and watch the trains come and go. She said it made her sexually excited. She visited the Railway Museum at Swindon last year, got aboard the fireman's platform of a 1923 locomotive, became so aroused, she threw herself under a diesel, a 1947 model. It was moving quite fast at the time. I've tried to get in touch with her ever since, but I don't think she's speaking to me. It's all over between us. Do you honestly believe that you can speak with the dead? Of course, said James. I looked at him with wide eyes. For such a dish, he had a strange mind. I think that will be all. I'll be in touch soon. Good night, James said. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. In one fluid movement, he grabbed his overcoat and left. What the hell? I'd got some strange quirks too. We'd get to know each other soon enough if he was the one I choose. It was only 5 minutes later that a slim young man with severe features arrived. Your name? I said, trying to sound officious. Bernard Hart. Like a smoke. No thanks, I said, but you go ahead. Sure. Yes. Quite sure. Your occupation? Registered nurse. I concentrated on my writing pad. You are interested in being a model? And live-in lover? Why? I asked him. I want the security of a woman's arms. How old are you? He paused for a moment, then said 27. 67. Have you had many girlfriends? Hundreds. I'd say. But they were all just a brief fling. I need security. Do you think being a model and live-in lover is secure? Oh yes, Bernard said. You hear of women leaving their husbands every day. People changing partners faster than they do at a whist drive. There's a certain strange quality that goes with the status of husband or wife. After the honeymoon, you have to practically ignore your spouse. That's expected up here. You can flirt with her friends at parties, but it's taboo to fondle your own wife. It's wrong to have fun with her. So where does she go for comfort? To her lover, of course. An aura of intrigue surrounds a lover and keeps a woman in love with him. Maybe it's because our society doesn't publicly condone lovers. Surely the lover gets to be like a husband if a girl lives with him long enough. That floored him for a moment, then he said, perhaps so, but Sheila told me you were young and healthy, and if there's anything I need right now, it's a young healthy girl. You know what I see every day? Sick women, crippled girls, deaf girls, old girls. I've seen hundreds of them in my duties as a registered nurse, waiting to be fed, washed, or crying for their bottles like babies, moaning for the pain to go away. I can't stand that life any longer. He leapt to his feet. No, wait, I said. It's driving me mad. I need a girl, a healthy girl. He grabbed hold of me. Hey, I yelled. You healthy girl, you. Let me carry you off. Let me drag you into my cave, tear off your clothes. Please let me be yours, and you be mine. But this is only an interview, Bernard, I said. He crushed me against his shallow chest. I struggled to my feet. He attacked me with an active mouth. He kissed my face, neck, and a couple of popped buttons later, my shoulder. He held me in the kind of grip that a drowning man might use on his rescuer. One of his legs wound around one of mine. He tried to throw me to the floor. This is not the way to conduct an interview, I yelled. We fell on the floor. Bernard pushed himself into an upright position, pinning me to the floor. I struggled to the window. Is that your car? I said. I'm not telling, you tigress, you. He ran his tongue along the inside edge of my left ear, as I plucked the car keys from his pocket. With a mighty heave I got him to the door. We half fell, half ran, sideways and frontwards and backwards, down the stairs. On the second floor a chap with red hair appeared in a doorway. A studious-looking man wearing a kimono threw open his door. They just stood and watched us as if they saw this kind of thing every day. James continued to push himself against me as we lurched outside. Despite not wearing a coat, I didn't feel the cold. I'll drive you home, I told him. Where do you live? I'm not telling you. I managed to get him downstairs. I pushed him in the passenger seat. I got the car started and drove away. I'd never driven anything more than a motor scooter, but that night I drove like Emerson feet a flaming Paul die. How? I've no idea, but I did. As we went along, Bernie boy tried to feel my boobs. Vulnerable as I was in the driver's seat, I managed to maneuver that car through the streets. Bernard's biting, rubbing and licking, turned the heads of passing motorists. I had to drive with the added handicap of tremendous embarrassment. It didn't matter that he wouldn't tell me where he lived. I didn't intending taking him there anyway. He'd made a mockery of the interview. He kept up the attack, tugging at my skirt, until I stopped the car. He glanced up to see where we were. That gave me a chance to jump out, run around the other side to open the door and haul him out. I rushed him through the doors marked hospital emergency. I had the strength of 10 sumo wrestlers by this time. I delivered him into the care of 2 startled and healthy nurses, and ran off down the corridor. I returned, via taxi, from the hospital. In that cold damp garret, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. Chapter 11. All 3 men had something to offer. The first had that odd combination of naivete and experience. The second had a nice face and a thinking mind that, after all, did appreciate art. The last had that raw, wild quality. But the choice seemed easy to make. Next morning, on the hall payphone I spoke to Sheila, my hand muffling my voice from any eavesdropping tenants. The interviews went really well, I told her. Darts wasn't mentioned once. Where did you ever find that Bernard? I met him last year when I was in hospital for an appendix operation. He used to bring me the bedpan. And if I was very lucky, he'd give me a blanket bath. You should write a book, I said, but he's something, yes. Yeah, he's top of the pops. Have you made a choice? It has to be James Hickey, I said. He's the best looking. That's great. I'll let him know. When do you want him to start? Tomorrow. She sighed. Tomorrow? You sure you can handle him? Yeah. See you soon then. Hold on, Sheila said. Look babe, don't worry about contraception. I'll take care of that for you. How she laughed again. Don't ask too many questions. I heard the telephone click down. I spent all day in my room, jumpily moving from corner to corner trying to decide which angle I should draw from. I could picture James standing there under light, at last my life was taking that illicit turn I'd always longed for. I wondered what everybody would be doing in his little York world. Dad making 400 more elastic stockings on his big black machine. Mr. Dixon snarling at my replacement. Mr. Downing lecturing to an empty classroom or reading a life of Joshua Reynolds to a sleeping Gauguin. I didn't know if I'd have to explain James to Mr. Marriott. I hadn't seen any of the other tenants bringing lovers in, but this was the kind of neighborhood where these things went on. Besides, I didn't know who lived here and who didn't. The two chaps who showed their faces during the Bernard Hart fiasco didn't seem too alarmed. They likely wouldn't mind, though Mr. Marriott might demand more rent if he knew James was staying. Maybe I would end up smuggling him in piggyback style. What to actually do with James occupied my mind. This was long before How to Manage Your Sex Life were in the bookshops. I found myself turning to my John Donne textbook for help. I tried to find some instructive lines in the elegy on his mistress, but the 17th century language got in the way. I'd lost full understanding of it the day I received my BA. Another of his elegies to his mistress going to bed seemed more useful, though it appeared to deal more with undressing than with what to do after you were undressed. After reading both poems several times, I decided that this was going to be one examination I couldn't study for. In matters of this sort, nature would be a more reliable guide. I had a bath in lukewarm water. The Marriott water was seldom hot. I checked in the mirror whether or not to shave my legs. I decided not. It mattered that I wear my best, though, on this night of nights. It's a strange feeling you have when you're embarking on your first lover. You think such things as, what he'll wear in bed, whether he'll notice the pimple on your bum, whether he brushes his teeth before coming to bed, what position he prefers to sleep in, and how he'll look in the mornings. And if you're going to be able to stand sharing a room with a man, you wonder if having him there is going to be all right with the police, or the church, or the local council. It's bound to be contravening some law. I didn't want to dwell on all that. As I prepared to welcome James to my artist's garret, I thought how simple the interviews had made the acquiring of a male companion. All the wooing, spending money on makeup and clothes, and being eternally nice, all that skipped. Funny, how deciding on the bohemian life had brought the men frothing to my door, ready to pose for me, cook for me, sleep with me, with not a word about weddings or bridesmaids. I gave myself the old once-over. In the mirror, I sneered at myself, sexily. Chapter 12. We met on the corner of Fossgate and Walmgate. The cold, blustery wind swept us into a nearby cafe. We set down James's suitcase by the door. We sat at a corner table. The waitress came over. We laughed and elbowed each other, self-consciously trying to show her that we weren't self-conscious, perhaps just a little eccentric. The wind is howling, but I'm as warm as toast, James warbled. We ate toasted cheese sandwiches. Following coffee, we ventured into the night, giddily leaning on each other. In the taxi, we snuggled together, touching foreheads and giggling. Doesn't it seem funny, James said, that on our first date we're both going home to the same room? That caused the cab driver to watch us in his rear-view mirror more than he watched the road. He grinned at James meaningfully when he paid him and gave him an extra-large tip. I hustled James into the Marriott hideaway. The old man lay snoring in the living room. James and I both collided with walls and tripped on steps in our efforts to be too quiet, but I don't think anyone heard us. 73 We could hear noises in the rooms, but no one came out. Once in the studio, I hung up our coats and threw a few stray articles into drawers. I had been too excited to notice them before. I put James's suitcase next to one end of the bed. James sat on a chair, then on the bed, then on the chair again. Trying to appear nonchalant, I put on an indifferent face as if I had men in my garret every day of the week. Some Enchanted Evening by Mantovani and his orchestra played in my head. I must have looked a bit embarrassed. We both laughed, a little self-consciously. I'm really glad you applied for the job, James, I said. Yes, So am I. Yes. Doesn't it seem funny to have our first date in your flat? It usually takes 2 or 3 outings to achieve that prize, does it? I've never thought about it. Do you think anyone heard us on the stairs? James asked me. I shouldn't think so, I replied. Too much noise in the other rooms. I've read about this situation in novels, he said gravely. Oh, yeah, the Northern novel, Stan Barstow, John Brain, kind of loving and all that James replied. Most Northern novelists have the gift of beautifying the truth for the unimaginative, don't you think? Yes, said James, we Northerners are naturally suspicious of successful love affairs, believing that there is more of the eternal in unsuccessful ones. Do you have anything to drink? I'll get you one. That's great, James said, then picked up a book that was lying around. What did you think of this? He asked me. 74 what? Catcher in the Rye. Great. People keep stealing it, and I keep buying new copies. I haven't opened that one yet. I don't want to decrease its value. He put the book down. I should have made cocktails, but I haven't a cocktail shaker. I suppose I could use the jar that I keep my toothbrush in. James didn't hear, he was looking at another book. I'll see you in a minute, I said. I went down to the second floor to wash out the jar. I was about to enter the landing bathroom when flushing preceded the opening of the toilet door and the chap with red hair came out. Activity night up there again, said the man. I went puce and blurted out, he's my cousin. I blushed and re-entered my room. Back in the studio, James looked up from a book, Lust for Life, and said, you have a lot books about painters, don't you? Yes, I answered. I've always said that the 2 greatest influences on my life were Vincent van Gogh and Elvis. He carried on looking at my books, whilst I attempted a cocktail. I mixed ice cubes, sherry, sweet vermouth in the Emps jam jar. As I didn't have glasses, I poured the mixture into cups. I took his drink over to him. Sour / No cherry, I said, giving him his drink. Likewise, darling, he said, smiling broadly and looking me straight in the eye. I shivered. / he clinked cups and drank. James got up and went to my drawing board. Let's see some of your work. James said. I haven't done any since I got here. I've been waiting for a model. A model like you? James leered at me. That's nice. I think I'm going to like it here. I crossed to the bed, sat down. James joined me. Good cocktail? I asked him. Very. What do you call it? A 9-10, I told him. Why? It knocks you out. I laughed long and hard at my own joke. James looked puzzled. At 9, 10, out. Get it? TC. Drink up and I'll make the next one. I finished my drink. James got up. Tea cubes are loose in the tray, I told him. James opened the fridge. Lifted out my trophy. What's this? I pretended not to care, and fixed my gaze on a damp spot on the ceiling. He was waving it about in the air. This. It's my one and only trophy. What's it doing in the fridge? Trying to be casual, I said. They say it's good for the silver, keeps it cold. It sort of looks good in there against the milk bottle, don't you think? My own opinion is that you can't afford the time for drama, babe. You've got to give yourself to your art. But then, that is only my opinion and you are free to do as you see fit. Thanks, I said. He brought the drinks over. Handed me one. After an embarrassed pause, I spoke. I think the sky's clear now. We might be able to see the stars if I turn out the light, James whispered. Yes, do. I flicked the light off, and stumbled back to James. He reached for my hand. Babe, you're freezing, he said. He then put his arm around me. I thought, here we go, overture and beginners please. Suddenly James began to sway. His mouth quivered and a low moan came out of his mouth. Table, oh, table. I jumped up in alarm. He spoke again. Table, if you understand me, knocked 3 times. Nervously, I watched the table. Oh table. Oh table. To prove that I have made contact with the other world, knocked 3 times. I watched in terror. I was pretty upset. What was this? I didn't know if the table moved or not. I watched it and I thought I heard 3 distinct thuds, but I'm sure I didn't see it move. Auntie, Auntie, can you hear me? Howled James. His eyes fixed on the skylight. Auntie, please answer me, can you hear me? There was no reply, only a radio elsewhere in the house. Oh, Auntie, how are you? Oh, that's good. Why did you take so long to answer? Oh, my, we never get rid of life's little nuisances, do we? James, I whispered, no one is answering you. Oh, yes Auntie, I must tell you, James rambled on in the shadows. You know how I've had that urge to have a mistress? Well, I finally got the opportunity, and now I'm living with a real artist. I am going to be her model. Imagine, your little nephew, a model, isn't it fantastic? I moved closer to the door. All this was a bit bloody peculiar. Auntie, would you like to speak to my artist friend? Of course you would. Well, she's a little shy, but she's very nice. Oh, dear, she's gone out of the room just now, but she'll. That was the last I heard as I beat a hasty retreat, and hurried down the stairs. Perhaps the night air would clear my mind. I hunched up in my coat. The usually hostile darkness of the street embraced me like the arms of a friend. Of all the lovers in all the garrets in the world, I had to get one who spoke with the dead. I was getting angry about the whole thing, more angry than scared. No matter how good-looking he was, he was not going to take over my studio for his séances. And I did not intend to paint him in one of his trances, no matter how still he sat. Clenching my fists, I headed back to the house with a single purpose, to toss that weird bugger out on his ear. When I got back to Marriott's, I crept up to the garret door, thinking that if he was still entranced, I'd burst in and break the spell. I heard nothing. Opening the door a crack, I peeked inside. I couldn't see him. Had he left? Or had he vanished into the twilight zone? Heart pounding, I swallowed hard, threw open the door and flicked on the light. James lay in my bed, asleep. James, I said, not too loudly, but loud enough. I couldn't believe anyone could have the nerve. I threw back the bedclothes. He was dressed in my blue housecoat, and red bed socks. James, wake up, I screamed. I shook him. He mumbled and tried to embrace me. Jesus! Had I got myself a transvestite? James! Wake up! You can't have a trance in here. You'd better get out. Now. Right now. I mean it. I grabbed one of his feet and twisted it. He yelped as he slipped onto the floor. Oh. Babe. Babe, I don't understand. His tone was enough like his previous moaning to keep me both scared and angry. You heard what I said, get out of here. I want you right out of here. Get out. Now shoo. Out. I threw his coat at him and hastily jammed all the clothes I could find into his. Don't scream, he pleaded. I am not screaming, I screamed. Out, _out, spells vamoose. I threw his coat and trousers at him. James stepped into his shoes and ran down the stairs. I chased him out of the house and he headed in the general direction of the main road, a silhouette flapping toward the city lights like a giant moth. Shaking with fright and cold, and most of all disappointment, I returned to the house. As I made my way upstairs, I saw the chap with the bushy red hair leaning against his doorway, his arms folded across his broad chest. His face was a study in smugness. I realized that he had been there when James and I went flying by. All he said now was, I'm impressed. Chapter 13. I didn't sleep too well that night and I was glad when Saturday morning rolled around. I looked up from my pillow and saw the clear blue sky through my frosty skylight. I was glad it wasn't dark anymore. There was a tap on the door. I got out of my warm bed and opened the door. It was the red-haired man. He was wearing baggy denims, a blue and white striped t-shirt, and a multicolored kerchief tied at the neck. "Good morning, can I come in?" he said. His presence intimidated me. He was a good 18 inches taller than me. "Yes, I'll make some coffee." I wanted to be a good neighbor. "You can stand instant." "I can if you can, but it's another example of technological advances that are turning us all into robots." "Yes. I'm Babe, by the way." "Nice name. Very suitable." "Jack London." Same as the writer, that's right." We shook hands. He looked around the room. Then scowled at the calendar girl. Glanced over the books. He crossed to my drawing board and picked up a blank piece of paper. "Where's all the colossal work you've done so far?" he asked me. "When I get settled, I think it will come more easily," I said. "Sheila said you were an artist, and I just took it for granted you'd have some great pictures." "You know Sheila?" Sure now, I know Sheila, we've kept in close touch ever since she discovered you." "Discovered me?" There was water in the kettle and, while we talked, I had put it on the stove. I had spooned the coffee into cups. I now stood by the fridge, staring at Jack London as he made himself comfortable on the bed, grouping two cushions and a pillow between his back and the wall. "Discovered me?" I said again. "There's a lot to tell you. Anyway, I was sort of lying around with Kathy, having this tremendous conversation, when I thought, it's about time I approached you about the posters." Jack London had the kind of moist, half-closed eyes that didn't seem to be looking at you when they are. His eyes, his soft voice and his lounging position clashed with the importance of what he was telling me. This casual approach of his didn't put me at ease at all. It did the opposite. I felt as if a noose had been dropped around my neck and was being tightened ever so slowly, with an interval for a coffee break. Mr. London." "Jack." "Sorry, Jack, look, I wanted to be an artist, just a nice uncomplicated artist. So many people like me go through life saying they want to do things, and they never do them. The big hurdles were quitting my job, moving out of my parents' house, and breaking with my boyfriend. I jumped those hurdles, and now I want to get down to some serious work. I've had a bit of trouble with models, but I'm sticking it out. I'm my own woman. I'm free. Hold on. Those are the wild, crazy qualities we like about you. And we were only a little dismayed by the sample of bourgeois notoriety you managed to pick up the other night." "Pick up? Who?" "James Hickey for one." I blushed. "If you must have a lover, fine. I don't think it's going to hurt the cause. I wish I knew what you were talking about." "Sit down and I'll tell you, but remember, once I do tell you, you're committed." I sat in the chair, then glanced up at the skylight, hoping that someone like Tarzan of the Apes was there to save me, the weak and the oppressed, from this menacing man. "Let me make the coffee first," I said it as if I needed his permission. "Okay." I poured the water in the cups with a shaky hand. I put the milk and sugar into mine while Jack took his black. One chair I placed between him and me for a coffee table, the other I sat on. "Kathy has this wild, uncanny knack of brewing coffee, and we'll have you down for a cup sometime and rescue you from this sludge," Jack London said. "I suppose you'll be wanting to know what our plans are for you. So, let me say first that Sheila knows I was going to tell you sometime this weekend, and as I told Kathy, Big Monday is not far off, so I'd better tell Babe." "Go on," I said, feeling very insecure in my night dress. "Babe. I've traveled this damn country up and down, from Land's End to John O' What's It? And I've met lots of young people like myself, and they are as restless as I am. We've never had a revolution here. But we've been listening to promises for far too long, and they, the youth that is want to do something about this unbelievable country of ours. Do they? I said what? Take me, I've hitchhiked all over. I've worked on farms, harvested potatoes, slept in fields, and everywhere youth is anxious for action. I've thrown up in the fountains in Trafalgar Square. Trudged for eternity through Norfolk, home of the Broads. I've put raging cats into parrot cages in Harrods, and I made wild earth-quaking love to a vicar's wife in Hastings. I inhaled the fishy smell of Hull. I rode a motorbike through a hotel foyer in Highgate. I'd been visiting the tomb of Karl Marx. It's a surge, you see, a surge that brought me back here to York, to serve one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. I laughed. Not Sheila? No. Sheila is one of the many groupies, I mean, concerned citizens who knows we have to do something about this gloomy country, and has joined with an enterprising band of university students to form an underground cell called Rebels in Action, which is planning a great and stupendous political coup. Subversives? Here in York? I didn't believe it. I thought all students were like us when we were at university, I said. We all wanted to be folk singers, or actors, rock stars, or at a pinch, poets. And wear Guernsey sweaters and black eye makeup. An edge came into his voice. You don't know what's going on, babe, do you? Obviously, I don't, no, He interrupted. We have a great cause, and a great leader. Ah, I see. I didn't though. This is what I crossed the country in search of, a cause and a leader like ours. He is a man who started from his fight for the rights of his fellows and broadened his horizons to encompass changing the entire system of government. Under his leadership we are going to overthrow the present system and establish an entirely new one. Who is this man? I muttered. Anarchist. We went through the motions of letting you look at rooms, but we wanted you to end up here, where I could be close to you. You are everything we want in a rebel, a talented young woman who has thrown over a comfortable life, that great rarity, a working-class artist. The model business, I said in a chocked voice. Why did Sheila help set up those interviews for me? A harmless whim of yours, that you have a lover who doubles as a model. We knew you'd chose James Hickey, him being the best looker. Feel free to bring men up here if you want, as long as you tell them nothing about the group. So Sheila had helped bring all of this about. I felt like telling her that helping other people is a drug so dangerous that there is no cure short of total abstention. My dad had often warned me that all you did was weaken people by helping them too much. Jack got up. Flexed his muscles. Thanks for coffee. I've got to get moving, he said. You haven't finished it? Kathy and I are making this wild, tremendous trek to JJ's hideout. One more thing, we want to meet up here on Friday night, at 10 o'clock sharp. Patterson will be here and will officially induct, is that the right word? Induct you, and it'll be a good chance for you to do some sketches of him. I wanted to protest that I wanted no part of this, but I didn't. I just stood there in my night dress, looking gormless and feeling cold. See you soon then, said Jack, and left.